What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we will be breaking down our must-add waiver wire players for Week 11 of the 2023 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year round: free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. But more importantly, get in the comment section down below anything that you guys need for Week 11 of the season. Let me know, and I'll get back to you guys as soon as I possibly can. Without further ado, let's hop right into today's video. All right, first on the list, I'm going to talk about Keaton Mitchell, who was the first player on last week's list as well. He comes in at 49% rostered, so he just makes the mark. I really try to focus on players who are rostered in under 50% of leagues. And I think what happened was he did pop up on the injury report going into this Week 10 matchup against Cleveland. And then the second part was, it was Cleveland. This is a great defense, or has been a great defense for majority of the season, although they basically bent against the Ravens in Week 10. But confusing game for Keaton Mitchell in Week 10, who had 3 touches in the first half for 34 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, had 1 reception for 32 receiving yards, and his second target was in the end zone as well. When we look at the amount of touches that Keaton Mitchell had in just 3 total touches, amount of yards per carry at 11.3 after having 15.3 yards per carry in Week 9 off of 9 touches, he needs to get the football more. I mean, I get that Gus Edwards has been good all year long for the Ravens, and Justice Hill has been looming around and had some plays, but Keaton Mitchell at some point is going to get more touches in this offense. Don't exactly know when it's going to be, but man, he needs to be rostered at this point. And I always tell you guys, I don't trust Ravens running backs. I have a good feeling about Mitchell. He's still hanging out there on the waiver wire. Whether you need running back help or not, I truly believe he has the potential to be a league winner. Go check if he's available. Pick up Mitchell if he's out there as we approach Week 11. All right, next up on the list is Devin Singletary, who comes in at 54% rostered, so a little bit over the mark, but I still want to talk about him because it's not incredibly highly rostered, and he got 30 touches in Week 10 against the Cincinnati Bengals, ended up with 150 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, and added 1 reception for 11 receiving yards, totaling at 23.1 fantasy points. And in Week 11, he plays one of the worst run defenses in the whole league in the Arizona Cardinals before he faces the Jacksonville Jaguars. A little bit of a tougher matchup. But then in Week 13, he faces the Broncos, who have been the worst unit against the run nearly all year long, fantasy-wise. And the big thing I want to talk about here is that this offense looked just fine, handing the football off to Devin Singletary a ton, and still being able to turn around and let CJ Stroud throw the football. It just had a different flow with the heavy amount of usage for Devin Singletary compared to some of the games we saw Dameon Pierce get 20-plus touches this season. So I know Pierce is going to come back at some point. He's been dealing with the ankle injury. Even if it's in Week 11, I still have a really good feeling about Devin Singletary and his usage in this offense as a whole. So go out there and check if Devin Singletary is available. You're struggling at running back, should absolutely be added as we approach Week 11. All right, last running back I'm going to mention is Antonio Gibson, who's rostered in 56% of fantasy leagues, so a little bit over the mark. But once again, double-digit fantasy points in the last 2 weeks, starting to slowly get more and more involved in this offense again. 5 or more targets in his last 3 games, 5 receptions in his last 3 games as well. So not doing a ton on the ground, not getting a lot of touches there, but getting involved in the pass game, which at the end of the day is what this offense is going to be utilizing, because their defense is so bad that Sam Howell is playing from behind and needing to throw the football and does an okay job at it. They get the Giants in Week 11, a good matchup here. Gibson's coming off of his best fantasy performance on the year so far, 16.5 fantasy points, had the receiving touchdown, a good day. Brian Robinson still did his thing, and it looks like these two can actually finally, at this point in the season, coexist and both have decent fantasy days. I don't think Gibson's necessarily going to be incredibly consistent, but at this point in the season, struggling at the running back position, and Gibson is available in your league, he's at least worth adding as we approach Week 11. All right, moving on to wide receivers. Let's talk about Noah Brown, rostered in 36% of fantasy leagues at the moment. We talked about him as a priority add moving in to week 10. But I'll be honest with you guys, I wasn't purely confident in starting him in week 10. But when we got the news that Nico Collins was going to miss this game, encourage more of you guys out there to potentially throw Noah Brown in as a wide receiver 2 or flex option if you needed to. And man, did he show up. I mean, I know at a point in this game, Tank Dell had to leave and come back. But overall, Noah Brown looked great. 8 targets, 7 receptions, 172 receiving yards, and 24.2 fantasy points. Robert Woods only had 3 targets in this game. Tank Dell, obviously the #1 option in this passing attack with Collins out at 14 total targets. And Dalton Schultz still limited around with 6 targets in this game. But Noah Brown, my main reason for wanting to pick him up going into this past week was because we know this Texans offense is going to throw the football a ton. This is what they're going to do on a week-to-week basis. And if Noah Brown becomes a part of that, then we want to get parts of those shares before he breaks out. And now it's looking like after this week, he's going to be rostered in more than 50% of leagues for sure. So simply put, he gets a good matchup against Arizona in week 11 at home, a good matchup against a poor Jacksonville Jaguars secondary in week 12 at home. Then they get the Broncos at home in week 13, who have been abysmal against every position from a fantasy perspective all year long. So Noah Brown's out there. Simply put, I think he's a top priority wide receiver waiver wire ad moving into week 11. All right, next up, let's talk about Quinton Johnson of the Chargers, coming in at 45% rostered. Finally scored a touchdown. Finally did something in fantasy in a decent week 8 against the Bears before doing nothing in week 9 against the Jets. But in week 10, in the shootout game against the Lions, 13.4 fantasy points, 4 targets, 4 receptions, 34 receiving yards, and a touchdown. And I'll go out and say it right now. I'm not going to be confident in starting Quinton Johnson unless you're absolutely desperate. But this offense, we know they're going to throw the football a ton. They tend to play from behind quite a bit. Josh Palmer's hurt. Saw Keenan Allen get a little bit dinged up today. Gerald Everett's hurt. And Mike Williams is still on IR. So it's a high-powered passing attack from the Chargers. At some point, Quinton Johnson has to get involved and stay involved and hopefully be consistent. So I know Jalen Guyton stepped up a bit today, which was nice to see as well. He's a player who we could potentially consider moving forward, but I'll still give a slight edge to Quinton Johnson's upside. I will say, however, week 11 against Green Bay, week 12 against Baltimore, 2 tougher matchups, but hey, if you're thin at wide receiver, maybe you're in a good spot, you just want a bench wide receiver, Quinton Johnson, if he's out there, worth a bench spot as we approach week 11. All right, next up, let's talk about Jaden Reed, who since week 4 has hit double-digit fantasy points in every game except for 2. Bad performance in week 5 with 1.7 points, but in week 9, 7 fantasy points. So decent, I guess, not completely awful, but for the most part, every other game, 10.5 points in week 4, 11.1 in week 7, 12.3 in week 8. Then his second best fantasy mark of the whole season in week 10 against the Steelers with 19.4 fantasy points, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 84 receiving yards, and a touchdown. When it comes down to it, I do not care about Christian Watson whatsoever anymore in fantasy. I simply don't want any shares of Christian Watson moving forward. Romeo Dobbs continues to get those red zone targets, be kind of the touchdown guy, and Jaden Reed has kind of been the next option at wide receiver in that same regard. Just simply put, Watson is rostered in 77% of leagues, where Jaden Reed is rostered in just 31% of leagues. I don't think he's going to be necessarily consistent. He's going to be more of a flex option. It's the Chargers, the Lions, the Chiefs, teams that the Packers are going to be playing from behind against in the next 3 weeks. He can be a flex option. And simply put, he's just been better than Christian Watson so far on the season. I would rather own him if he's out there. You need help at wide receiver. Jaden Reed is worth adding as we approach week 11. All right, got a quarterback for you guys as we move into week 11 of the season to add from the waiver wire. And this is the same quarterback that I begged you guys moving into week 10 to add from the waiver wire. Josh Dobbs has shot up to 59% rostered according to the Sleeper app. And I think he'll be rostered in a lot more leagues after his week 10 performance against the Saints. 25 fantasy points, 34 passing attempts, 23 completions, 268 passing yards, passing touchdown, 44 yards on the ground, and a rushing touchdown. It's the Broncos in week 11 and the Bears in week 12. He should be rostered in all single quarterback leagues at this point. If you own him in Superflex or double quarterback leagues, that's great. If you're in a single quarterback league, you're struggling at quarterback, maybe Trevor Lawrence is your starter, maybe you still have Justin Fields injured, I don't know, whatever it is. Maybe your quarterback's on bye week in week 11. Doesn't really matter. These next two matchups are so good for Josh Dobbs, who has 24.9 or more fantasy points in his last 3 starts. He's a QB 10 right now in fantasy. Should be rostered in more leagues. Simply put, he's looked great. It's a great comeback story for a player that none of us saw coming into this year, doing what he has done. Just doesn't matter. The stats are there. The fantasy points are there. The matchups are now there. Pick up Josh Dobbs. Even if you have a decent quarterback or a good quarterback, throw him on your bench, take him away from another opponent as we approach week 11. That'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today or find it helpful in any way, be sure to subscribe on the way out. This is all we do here all year round. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe. But more importantly, please get in the comments section down below. Anything that you guys need at all, starts, sits, ads, drops, waiver advice, trade advice, roster reviews, whatever you guys need. Moving into week 11 of the season, let me know. I'll get back to you guys as soon as I possibly can. With that, I will say, thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.